So the Shroud of Turin is the most scientifically studied artifact in the history of the world. There's no artifact that's been studied more. The initial one was in '78, then they did the carbon-14 in 1988, and then there's been many studies after that, and we'll get through some of those. But it's the most studied artifact in the history of the world. And so it was one of the studies that was done, it was a forensic investigation. So like I said, when I saw it, it was pretty clear to me, here's an image of a crucified man, badly beaten crucified man on a piece of cloth. So they showed it to the LA County coroner and several other coroners and medical examiners, and they all came with a conclusion. Yes, that's an image. We can't tell you how it got there, but this is an image of a man who was scourged, beaten, and crucified, and actually also interesting, in a state of rigor mortis. There's no deterioration. Remember, he was going to rise in 3 days. Rigor mortis lasts for 48 hours. After that, the body starts to deteriorate. And so it's in a state of rigor mortis. And here's a close-up of the eyes, and there's facial swelling. Remember, he was beaten. His nose is broken. And here's the blood from the crown of thorns. And the blood on the Shroud of Turin is type AB with male DNA. Now, those of us in the medical profession know that there's no nucleus, there's no DNA in the red cells, it's in the white cells. So that's where they get the DNA from, is from the white cells. So there's white cells in it too. We'll get into that. And then here's an interesting fact that a forger would have had to really think about, is that because it's a three-dimensional image, you don't see it because this is the upper level surface. The image on the Shroud of Turin, remember I said, is on the upper 6 microns. It's not a dye, it's not a scorch, it's not a vapor. On the upper 6 microns of the fibril, and any dye, paint, or whatever penetrates into the medulla. But underneath the eyelids are Roman leptons, minted in AD 29 by Pontius Pilate. They're on there. They're on that image. And it's deep to it because, again, the resurrection. In fact, the blood is deep to the image too, because, again, as he's resurrecting, it's taking 3D information. We'll go through that a lot. So Roman leptons, which of there, I think there's still like 3 or 4 left in the world. So the scourging marks, remember the Jewish would only scourge about 30 because more than 30 could kill a man. They count about 120 scourge marks on him, and it matches the Roman flagrum, which was a wooden tong with leather straps, and at the end would be dumbbell-shaped, either metal or sometimes bone. And you can take one, and it matches each one of these scourge marks. And in fact, under the forensic investigation, they can tell that one person was whipping this way, and another person was whipping that way, and one person was taller than the other. So this image somehow is of a man scourged and crucified, and his image ends up on a piece of linen at 6 microns. I'm sure we can do that today. So here's the nails and the blood flow, and if you stretch out, we as physicians know, if you stretch out, you can see the blood flow is what it should have been. It's going vertically rather than horizontal. So if he was lying down, the blood would penetrate and wouldn't flow down. He was clearly vertical, as we know. And this is, again, all these really good photographs are from 1978 from a guy called Vernon Miller, and then there's been photographs and others since then time. But he did probably the definitive study. What's interesting, in 2012, so again, a lot of recent information has come. It's hard to see, but in this image of the wrist that we just showed you, that's an image of an actual nail. And it matches what they have in the museum in Jerusalem of a nail from the 1st century. So there's an image of a nail as well as the image of our Lord crucified. Again, forger would have to be really good to do all that. Here's one of the best pieces of evidence. So in 1978, Dr. Max Frey, who was a botanist, he was, anyone like CSI? he was like the CSI for the European Union. He would basically, they would find someone that said, well, I wasn't in Belgium on August 8th, and he'd vacuum their trousers and their shoes, and he'd find pollen or grains or whatever. And no, you were in Belgium because that plant only grows. Well, so he vacuumed the Shroud of Turin in 1978, and he found all these pollen ectoskeletons. And most of them were in the France and Italy area. Some would go back to Constantinople, and some went back to Odessa, Greece, which is now Turkey. And then there was a couple of these that he could not identify. And so he went down to Jerusalem, and the crown of thorns plant has that pollen. So that pollen was on the head area where the crown of thorns were on the Shroud of Turin from Jerusalem. Blooms only in the springtime. We know our Lord was Christ crucified in the springtime. The Shroud of Turin is faded because it's been around for 2,000 years. It actually has some images of flowers on the bottom part of the Shroud of Turin.